طيبة. And we've been looking at this hadith for the last few weeks. We might wrap it up today, inshallah. But people want to pull it up, hadith number 10. Can somebody read the Arabic and the English, the hadith? You have food in your mouth, amazing.
I can read this.
Yeah, go for it.
On the authority of Abu Huraira, may Allah be pleased with him, the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, said, Allah the Almighty is God, and accepts only that which is good, and verily Allah has commanded the believers to do that which He has commanded the messengers. So the Almighty has said, O you messengers, eat of the tayyibat, all kinds of halal legal foods, and perform righteous deeds. And the Almighty has said, O you who believe, eat of the lawful things that we have provided you. Then He, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, mentioned the case of a man who, having journeyed far, is disheveled and dusty, and who spreads out his hands to the sky, saying, O Lord, while his food is haram, his drink is haram, his clothing is haram, and he has been nourished with haram. How can his supplication be answered?
Jazakallah khair. Does anybody want to read the Arabic? Yeah, go ahead.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا وإن الله أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين فقال تعالى يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا وقال تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم ثم ذكر الرجل يطيل السفر أشعث أغبر يمد يديه إلى السماء يا رب يا رب يا رب يا ربي ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملبسه حرام وغذي بالحرام فأنا يستجاب له.
Jazakallah khair. So, just to kind of summate a little bit here, when we've been looking at this hadith, a lot of what we talked about in the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ is still speaking about who Allah is to his companions. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, the narrator of the hadith, doesn't join this community until well into the Medinese period of revelation. And they're still learning, right? In Allah tayyib is still giving an insight on who Allah is. We talked about what it means for us to kind of be in pursuit of things that are morally, ethically good without ambiguity. So we know that Allah is good, and this hadith is saying that Allah is tayyib. So if Allah is good and Allah is tayyib, then being tayyib is good, right? And there's hadith, takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah, that you want to embody the characteristics of the divine in whatever capacity we can, right? So certain things we can't. And Allah is al-khaliq, the creator. Like, we can't make something from nothing, but Allah is Rahman, so you can exert rahmah, right? Because Allah is good and Allah is merciful, so then being merciful is good. Does it make sense? We talked about kind of the verses that were mentioned and what it means in terms of now consumption of things that are tayyib, right? And we want to juxtapose some of these things now. We can know what something is by knowing what it's not. So something that's halal is not haram. Something that is tayyib, the tayyibat, they're not from the khaba'ith, right? They're not things that are filthy or impure. And this hadith now is going to attach this to something that's really important to reflect upon, which at its conclusion is talking about an individual now whose food is haram, whose drink is haram, clothing is haram, and is turning to Allah within these characteristics that our tradition teaches us are characteristics of individuals that they likely have their dua accepted. Someone's traveling, dua is like accepted. of the traveler, hands are raised to the skies. He's calling upon Allah as his Rabb, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, right? And when we look at du'as in the Quran, these are usually the kind of preface du'as of the pious, yeah, Rabbana, or the Lord. But these other variables create now an impediment to the du'a's acceptance. Last week, just to kind of close up, somebody had said, you know that everything that is tayyib is halal, but not everything that's halal is tayyib. And I said, maybe. And I didn't come back to that point. So somebody said to me, well, what do you mean maybe? Right? Well, you can have something that's humanely raised, ethically treated. It can be organic in its quality. It can still be haram, right? Like there's organic wines. Pork can be organic. You can't consume pork just because it's organic, and say, oh, but it's tayyib, right? It's still pork. It's haram. Do you see? So it has capacity to fall into things that are raised in like some of these manners, but it still is rooted in what is impermissible. Does that make sense? Right? But we know that the haram is not going to be something that is ever permissible. And you can say, well, that just seems like it makes sense. Well, that clearly it makes sense, but in its actualization, then you want to be able to think about what the ramifications are of some of this. And this hadith is giving us now an insight that attaches all of these things. So when somebody then says, last week we talked about like what renders something to be permissible, halal, in terms of consumption. And we're looking at variables like the slaughtering method. We're looking at, was the invocation mentioned over it, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. And we're looking at the faith of the slaughterer. And we gave some different opinions on what constitutes halal and not, and how that can even be relevant to what's tayyib. But now you want to start to not think about it simply in the prism of permissibility, and think about it consequently in what the latter part of the hadith is talking to us about, its implication on the acceptance of things. The Prophet ﷺ has a companion by the name of Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, radiallahu anh, who is a relative of the Prophet. He's one of the 10 who are guaranteed paradise in a particular hadith where the Prophet mentions a group of companions. They're known as the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 who are given the glad tidings of Jannah, right? May Allah make us their companions in Jannah. There's a lot of other companions who are given the glad tidings of Jannah who are not mentioned in that hadith. So it's more than 10 ultimately who are given this over various interactions. But Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, he's one of them. In his teens, he accepts Islam. He's like in the first dozen who accept Islam, number 7 or so in terms of, people who convert to Islam. But he's one of the early Muslims. He fights pretty much in every battle that takes place in Medina. So he's at Badr, he's at Uhud. And at Uhud, it's not that he's a bystander, but Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, he's known for his archery skills. So at Uhud, when they're losing the battle, right? If we're not familiar with the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Badr takes place, and there's a substantially lesser number of people who are in the Muslim army against an overwhelmingly larger number of people in the Meccan army. And the Muslims win at Badr. At Uhud, the Muslims lose. And essentially what happens is that there's archers that are on a mount that if you ever go to the mountain of Uhud, when you visit Mecca and Medina, and there's a cemetery where the shuhada of Uhud, the people who fell as martyrs in Uhud, including Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiallahu an and Hamza radiallahu an, who we're talking about in the Sirah class right now on Wednesdays, they're buried there in the cemetery at Uhud, adjacent to, or not adjacent to, but in front of like the burial area that's sectioned off, there's a mountain. That's the mountain that these archers stood on. And what happens is a man by the name of Ikrama, the son of Abu Jahl, and Khalid ibn Walid, both of whom are not Muslim at that time, they essentially flank. And when the tide of battle seems like it's in the favor of the Muslims, the archers who were told not to move from their spot, they move. And that's when they are capitalized against by the opposition of the mushrikeen of Mecca. And everybody's kind of now separated from one another. But there's a handful of people who are with the Prophet ﷺ as he stands now seeking some kind of safety. And in Uhud, the Prophet gets injured like substantially. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is one of the people who's protecting him, do you know? And he plays a role at the Battle of Qadisiyah. He's a governor under Umar ibn al-Khattab's caliphate, right? He's got a lot that's going on with him in terms of like why he's given these, even if he only stood at Badr, like people say that those who fought at Badr, anything else that they did, they were forgiven for. Do you know? So all of these things we know and much more about Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. He asked the Prophet ﷺ about the nature of dua being accepted. And like, what can he do to have his dua be accepted? And the Prophet ﷺ says to him, eat from that which is tayyib, your du'as will be accepted. Does that make sense? So all this other stuff that he's got going on, which is important to know, when he asks about the nature of his supplication and its acceptance, the Prophet is telling this man who's got all of these other things embedded in his life, eat from that which is tayyib, your du'as will be accepted. These two things have a correlation with each other. And a lot of our spiritual tradition tells us that the nature of our spiritual elevation is attached to what we consume. This hadith in particular is telling us somebody eats haram, drinks haram, is clothed in haram. How are they going to think their dua is accepted? The correlation that goes between these two things is evident in verses in the Quran, hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but somewhere there's a disconnect that it doesn't get taught to us in that way. And when you're taught about the etiquettes of dua, you're taught about the acceptance of actions. When did somebody ever say to you that, hey, when you're deciding whether you're going to eat from this heavily processed place, or you're not going to think about everything that had to happen to that animal before you consumed it, or you're just going to go because you're thinking in these broader terms through your stomachs. So when someone asks like, well, can I eat this kind of meat or not? And we have these different opinions that exist on what is legally permissible, halal, but that doesn't make it tayyib. That's why you want to ask the question differently. Not about, am I allowed to eat like the meat that's served at the local diner or restaurant that's run by people who are not Muslim, or this thing that was not slaughtered by somebody who shares faith with me, or this other stuff. But think about it in the prism of what's happening here. Is me eating this going to somehow become a barrier to my heart being present in my dua? How is it impacting my spiritual self? The consumption of it in terms of permissibility does not answer the question of ethics. And later on in this discussion, we're going to talk about morality in our tradition even goes to the place of the way you treat the animal that you're going to consume. Morality extends to even the most simple, mundane acts that's shared across the board, like what we're going to break our fast on, what it is that we're going to eat in our meals, not done mindlessly, but mindfully. But here you want to think about it in this prism firstly. Why don't I think about the connection between the quality of what I eat, the quantity in addition to, because there's ethics that go into quantifiable measures of what we consume, but recognizing that it bears impact on things like my dua. And does anybody ever teach me this stuff when I'm thinking about it? So I can just rotely regurgitate a lot of different words. I can repeat the prayers that are blessed to repeat, that are mentioned in the Quran. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَ عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Right? It's in the Quran. A lot of us say this dua again and again. That, oh, my Rabb, give to me in this worldly existence that which is good, and give to me in the hereafter that which is good, and protect me from the fires of Jahannam, right? May Allah grant us this dua. But the impediment to some of it can be understood. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who's of the Ashara Mubashara, whose du'as are said to always be answered, he's being smart about what he eats. He acts upon it in that way. Eat from the tayyibat. Can something be tayyib and haram? Like, no, right? In the way that we're understanding it from an ethical standpoint, you don't want that to be what you exert your decision making on. And to then get to a place when you're making choices about what it is that I'm fundamentally consuming. And do I want to leave it to a place of ambiguity because my stomach is actually making the decision? Versus, am I thinking about this now through my heart? And do I have to struggle a little bit so I'm not just downing everything because it simply is halal? And that in and of itself, its permissibility, does not then still become the metric of answering this question. Well, how is it impacting the state of my prayer, the nature of my dua? So why would I want to give up my dua just because somebody said I am allowed to eat at McDonald's? Is that going to really be what it is that you want to chance the acceptance of that dua on? And the Prophet loves his companions. But if somebody stood next to you in a battle that you're losing and is willing to sacrifice their life so you're protected, is shooting as many arrows as possible, and they share that moment with you, and that person is now saying, what is it that I can do to have my du'as accepted? And the Prophet says, eat from that which is tayyib. Your du'as will be accepted. They will be answered. He's not just answering the question the way some of us have challenges because we're running through like a crowded conference and Sheikh so-and-so is there and we just have to ask them that individual question and they don't know anything about us. Or I'm skimming through like YouTube videos or audio of things that were parts of discussions that I wasn't even seated in. The person has no idea who I am. The Prophet knows this man. He knows Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. They've been through the thick of it together. He's saying to this person that he loves, eat that which is tayyib, your du'as will be accepted. That connection we have to think about at a deeper level, and that aspect of self-control. We're taught this in our exposure to some of these things. And maybe some of you did. But I know for me growing up, it was a lot of do this, don't do that. Don't do this, do that. Right? And the qualitative aspect, because this is what we said last week, there's a distinction with halal being a legal understanding of something and tayyib being a qualitative understanding of something. You understand? Where do we remove ourselves, not just in the particulars of this, but in the particulars of a lot of things that we do? Because there's stuff that happens that might be permissible, doesn't mean that it's ethical. And the nature of it now becomes something that still has impact back to me. Like the nature of it is here. How will the dua be answered? You're wearing clothes that were made in a sweatshop. Like, what do you think? You're wearing what you like stole from somebody else. Do you know? And we'll get to the place where it's important to understand that the Prophet doesn't say definitively at the end of this hadith, the du'as are not accepted. Because the magnitude still of Allah's rahmah is such that even in this situation, You can turn to the divine. You don't not turn to the divine. Do you know what I mean? But it's creating for us a recognition that we're going to get out of it what we put into it. So utilizing this as a base, right? That this impacts the nature of our dua. What are some of the things that get in the way? Pedagogies, methodologies, gatherings that we frequent, the things that we have been exposed to or not exposed to that doesn't have us think about our deen in this way, right? The Prophet ﷺ is telling his companion, you want your du'as to be accepted, eat from that which is tayyib. Who's telling us these things? And why is that something that gets left behind? The ethics, the quality that goes into our decision making, our choices. Does the question make sense? So we can turn the person next to us just so we can get talking a bit. You can answer this, share some names if you don't know names, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. Like, how do we get to this place where there's not an emphasis on these kind of qualitative understandings? The ethics gets less on. Why didn't anybody ever tell us that eating the tayyib or engaged in what's tayyib is important in like our relationship to dua, etc.? Do you know what I mean? In comparison to what we are taught consistently. Does that make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
This is actually something I discussed like being power. So their mindset is pretty much just like, okay, that's still
I mean, I wasn't interested, but I think like even outside of Islam, how values go. Like I was they like didn't really have to choose what they about what I like that was
Without necessarily punishing ourselves, like obviously but there are some people who well, I feel that's the option. Better. It comes in
Okay, so what are some of the things we're coming up with? What is it that contributes to perhaps like an absence of this in our own education, our own socialization? How do we land in this place? It seems like a big deal, right? Like something's going to contribute to the acceptance of your dua, or something is going to contribute to like your dua not being accepted. It seems like it's a serious thing. You know, your clothes are haram, food is haram, drink is haram. Like, how can this be accepted? Right? It's coming from the Prophet of God. You know, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. Like, what do I do to make my du'as answered? Eat from that which is tayyib, right? It's pretty simple in terms of what's there, right? So the consequences seem to be not mundane. So why are we not given this then? What did we discuss? What did you come up with? You want him to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, wait. So I think in my group we were discussing how in America it's just hard to pursue what is better, right? To just constant encouragement to just, I think it's self-explanatory. Just the influences and the encouragement are not that which is pure, right? And then there's also this idea of self-centeredness, if I can use that word to describe the situation you referenced, where not you, he's better than that, but where the consequences are not felt by us, and so we don't strive for better because the consequences are felt by others. And then we also talked about the idea of how from the inception of America, the product output of this country has never been something that was pure, right? And so that in itself is probably the origin of a context of spiritual depravity that has brought us to this point of choosing what is bad or good versus what is good or better.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, how many of us even know that this is an impactful thing in the first place? Right? Like, who sits and says to us, hey, if you go and eat garbage stuff, it can impact the acceptance of your dua. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? And this point that Harth is saying is important because we want to come back to it because we don't live in a bubble, right? People with money want to influence everything. And you want to be able to understand historically how it is that you can have major corporations that can then put an influx of cash into governmental apparatus that then influence like the development of fatwa that say smoking is okay. Do you know? Whether that's you're smoking a cigarette or you're smoking a hookah pipe. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's people who know how to get people to be in places where they can then influence certain things. And just because it becomes customary doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences back. Do you see what I mean? But where does the gap come in the dissemination of the information? Like, why is it not given to me in the first place? Because it's not a mundane thing. Like, your du'as will be accepted. Ya Sa'ad, like, eat what is tayyib. Your du'as will be answered, right? This hadith that we've been looking at for a month, that it starts with what is acceptable to God. In Allah tayyib, la yaqbalu illa tayyiba, right? Indeed, Allah is tayyib. He does not accept except that which is tayyib. And then it goes into connection points about eating that which is tayyib, right? And then doing the amal that is salih, right? There's a connection that's there that you do this and then it will yield this consequently. Do you see what I mean? So why is it not given in this way? Do you know like what's creating some of these gaps? And some of it can be that we're influenced by power structures that we don't even know is influencing us. And they're teaching us our deen in the way that they want it to be taught to us, not in the way that we want it to be taught to us, right? But what else contributes to this? Yeah.
We were talking about how, like, with food and clothing, like, it's not very visible that, like, if one chicken is one piece of meat that you're buying from the store is halal and the other is not halal, like, you can't visibly see the differences in them. And, like, so it's a lot for, like, what I was comparing it to was like salah or salah. It's like very visible that like you are physically performing salah or you're not. But meanwhile, the food that you eat, there's like the goodness of it is sort of in like how it came to you or like what went on in order for you to get this food, and that is sort of visibly hidden for you. So it's one extra step of needing to actually contemplate of is this food good or not. And then maybe perhaps doing some bit of research into, oh, is this kind of like that? And then I was also saying how when you're eating food, no one likes to be told, oh, hey, that food that you're eating is not good, or hey, did you know that this food came from whatever? Or people just want to be able to eat their food, and oftentimes the foods that we are most tasty and like addictive, like chips or processed food, are the ones that are the least good for you. So there's sort of like that just struggle, and I feel like food is a very like we need food to survive. So for someone to come up and tell you, hey, you need to adjust the way that you eat, and you're just like, I just want to eat. I feel like that is a struggle that people have.
Yeah, it's tough, and we're going to talk about that, right? But I would argue that it would be different if someone told me before what you eat impacts your du'a's acceptance, right? Why didn't anybody tell me that? Why didn't anybody tell you that? That's what I'm asking. Like, what contributes to the absence of that being taught? Yeah.
that comes to your house, or the guard that guards your office building or house or residential building, all of that impacts as well. You just don't think that far, and you just think on your principles.
Yeah, right. So there's a overt focus on what is like fiqh driven, right? The hyper legalization of Islam as a religion doesn't remove the idea that this is a part of it, but it's not absolutely the only part of it. If somebody came in here right now, was it in this halakha or the other halakha? Someone took their shahada last week, right? It was on Wednesday, right? This young girl took her shahada, right? Some of you all took your shahada sitting here too. And somebody's going to give you Islam. What are they going to give to you? If all you can give is like the mechanics and the answers, that's why then the conversation can't be one that renders consciousness, because you're only thinking about, well, am I allowed to eat this from the parameters of what my stomach wants, not what my heart needs? And then you can think about, why would you not eat something that, why would you want to eat something that didn't get slaughtered in the name of God? Why? Not about its permissibility or impermissibility, but thinking about it from the standpoint of what exists that's intangible, metaphysical. Why would you not want to eat something where the animal's rights were honored? Not stuck in like a mass production system, stuffed in a cage. And how? How does it not then have consequences? It's what's fueling your body, right? How will it not have its presence in the dua that you're making? And you don't want to have what is just a very simplistic conversation that is rendered to be something that's like, don't go to somebody and slap food out of their hand. You shouldn't eat that, it's gross, right? No, that's like a different variation of being the Sharia police in a prayer place. You're pulling on people's clothes while they're praying. Just let them pray, man. But in being in a place where you can reflect inwardly, and it's, I just want to eat it, and that's enough of a reason for me to consume it, then why don't you go eat some ham? You just want to eat it. You know what I mean? Why? It looks like people are happy eating bacon. Like, you go eat some bacon too, you know? Right? But you get to a place where you're demonstrated capacity that you have the discipline to say, I'm not going to eat that thing, right? I'm not going to drink that thing. But now you move beyond just what is permissible and impermissible, and you think about it at a deeper level that says, I'm not trying to do this in a place where I'm tasting something for a few minutes here that tastes good, but it's going to impact my capacity to make dua for someone that I love. And there's a trade-off that's there, right? I'm giving in the moment and telling myself I don't have exerted control over what I'm consuming. No, you do. Some of you don't, but not some of you don't. Some of you don't fast in Ramadan because you don't have the physical ability to, right? May Allah reward you for your intention. It's not easy, especially if you were able to fast at one point and then you kind of grow out of it and you can't, and you grow into a condition that keeps you from fasting. It's very hard, right? But you get to a place where a lot of us can fast. And when you do fast, that's what you're doing. You're controlling your consumption. Do you know? So if you can do it for 30 days straight in the middle of summer in Manhattan, right? Like, why can't you be in a place where that consciousness is exerted? And some of what creates consciousness is now extrapolating from hadith like this. What is it really telling me? My du'as have the potential of not being accepted, or being accepted, because all of me is connected to the rest of me. And so if I'm consuming that which is haram, then it's not tayyib, right? And I'm in a place now where permissibility alone is not what it is that I seek to navigate myself through. I want to start to get to a place where I also exert an understanding around the qualitative aspects of it. And as I start to know these things, I think about it. Is it permissible for me to eat food that is halal, but I purchase with haram wealth? right? I went down to Atlantic City, won a ton of money, and bought all of the food you just ate. Is there going to be metaphysical ramifications to that? Are you going to try to go eat at the home of somebody who murdered somebody? Be like, no, like there's no barakah in that. Good. So think about that now on the individualized level of what it is that this type of meticulousness that's not meant to be something that deprives us, but you get to a place where you start to understand what I put into this thing is going to yield me what I get out of it. Does it mean that I have to be in a place where all I'm eating is grass all day? Like, no, but Imam Nawawi, whose 40 Hadith collection we're reading, one of the reasons why he passes away early, they say, is because he refused to eat much of the food that was from his local community because he believed that government unjustly usurped lands from people, right? Social justice was driving his eating habits. Do you see what I mean? And as a starting point, you just start to think about it differently. This thing I'm about to eat, how often am I eating something that, like, yeah, like, alhamdulillah, you bring a cake, you want to eat the cake together, we're celebrating something, great. But, like, you shouldn't be eating cake 4 times a day. Do you know? And you could say, well, why do people do that? And thinking about this now deeply, that's not just about, again, the surface level. A lot of us utilize what we consume as a way to deal with like pain that we have, as a way to numb feelings, right? We eat our emotions, and you want to be in a place where we recognize that from the standpoint of sisterhood and brotherhood. You walk into a masjid and nobody even says salams to each other, right? This is why all of this is connected to it. The Prophet says the best of you are those who greet those that they know and those that they don't know. You could walk into a place and somebody judges you up and down, and then you got to carry all the hardship in your life all alone. Parents don't know how to talk to kids. Kids don't want to talk to parents. Spouses like live in marriages that died years ago because there's no element of like real care and affection. And so the only thing that I can do now is drown my sorrows in a bowl of something. I'm not even drinking something or smoking something to escape it. I'm just like eating in ways that are not healthy for my soul, let alone my body. Do you know? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? And so you can't fault yourself for some of it. Some of it is just consequential. I'm feeling terrible. I need to just eat some ice cream. Okay, like maybe once in a while, that's what you got to do. But then if it becomes habituated as a practice, right? I'm so deeply ingrained in an imbalanced work life schedule that all I can eat is chicken and rice all the time. I got to eat at a work desk constantly, right? I can't get up from it, so I got to get the quickest thing, which is a slice of pizza. You want to eat pizza? Go ahead and eat some pizza. But if you're eating 5 days out of the week, what is the fastest and easiest because you're eating out of worshiping your employer, like, and the dollars that are given to you, then you're going to get out of it what you're putting into it. Do you see what I mean? How will it not impact like your dua? Does that make sense? And then there's some of us who our stomachs just control us. And you got to be willing to admit that I get to a place where when I'm choosing between my heart and my stomach wins often. You can wean yourself off of anything. If you go 3 days, physiologically, it just resets your body. A 3-day fast, right? And there's a wisdom to the Prophet ﷺ fasting these 3 middle days of the month, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. It's a reboot. Some of you who have caffeine withdrawal headaches in Ramadan, after 3 days, you don't have them anymore. Unless after you break your fast, you OD and jug on like a gallon of coffee, then you're just putting it into your body again. Do you know what I mean? But you allow for it to detox so then you can see like this thing has this control over me. Why do I want something that exists outside of me to be able to exert this kind of control over me? You see what I mean? My ability to deal with like difficult situations, sadness, grief now becomes elevated to unwarranted anxiety and unhealthy anguish because you're eating too much sugar. You got too much caffeine in your body. It doesn't allow for you to really navigate some of these things well. You could say, is it that simple? Well, yeah, man. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas from the Ashara Mubashara asked the Prophet of God what he can do to have his prayers answered. And the Prophet says, eat from that which is tayyib, and your du'as will be answered, right? It's not like rocket science, you know? No one's hiding the answers from us. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? So, yeah.
So, one, I feel attacked, but no. I'm just having a bit of a cognitive dissonance here about this. Just in the system that we live in, where everything is like mass produced and we don't really know how the employees are being treated at farms unless we're buying things that are from like a farmer's market. It's kind of difficult to ascertain if we're eating.
Yeah, but that's where you try your best, right? But there's a difference between me being like, I don't know that the worker who picked this apple that got transported to Trader Joe's, how they were treated, versus I'm just going to go down the street and eat what's the quickest and fastest because it's the easiest, right? Or I'm simply eating this because I'm indifferent towards any of the rest of it. It just tastes good. And that's what it is that I am now subservient to. I'm subservient to the taste of it. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of yummy things that are healthy for you. Do you know? Like, and that's just true. Allah put so much bounty in this world that chasing after what is impermissible is a drop in a bucket of what is actually permissible. And all we're saying is start at a certain place, right? So if we're looking for metrics, our tradition teaches us to both be in a place where we have control as best as we can over the quantity and quality. So there's hadith that tell us things like 1/3 food, 1/3 air, 1/3 water, which means you should be drinking as much water as food that you're eating, right? And it's water. It's very specific around water. So how much water do you drink in a day? And just be honest with yourself. And why don't you drink that much water? Do you know? So drink more water. And it's good for you. Like it's clean, right? Like it's 0 calorie. It's just water. Do you know? So drink water. Most of you is water, right? And you're replenishing yourself with things that are not water based. Do you see what I mean? So even if I can't tell, like the worker is treated this way or that way, you can drink water instead of drinking the thing that is injected heavily with high fructose corn syrup. Like you can, right? At least some of the time. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? We all have varied relationships with this. You don't want to think about wellness in a prism of vanity, but you want to think about it through the intention of actual wellness. So your eating habits are not defined by the same structures that make it hard for us to know what to navigate around. So I'm not eating more or less because I'm trying to fit into a supremacist definition of what beauty is. And you want to be able to understand this too, right? Like just like the consumption variable impacts not just the nature of dua, but it impacts our ability to like see things differently. Individuals that I've met in my life who have been blessed with capacity to see through a vision that is unseen to many people. All that it is that they're really on top of is what they consume. Right off the bat, that's what it is that they're engaged in. Like their eating habits are solid. And if the majority of what you're putting into your body is not good, then it's not good. You just have to acknowledge that. And then you have more difficult conversations. When we opened up our butchery that's closed now, organic, hand slaughtered, fair wages to employees, like humane treatment of animals, I could tell you like where the animal came from. I could tell you who slaughtered it. And when you go and buy it, like you know who's eating it. We know every hand that it went through, right? It's not impossible. It's very probable, in fact. And then you ask questions, right? So we were doing a organic hand slaughtered product in a market that's very volume driven. So a pound of beef was not like grossly, high margin because I'm trying to make, I wear like the same clothes every time I'm sitting here. I clearly did not make millions of dollars off my butchery. Do you know what I mean? I could have jacked up the price, and then people who are like, oh, I only eat organic, like halal, right? And they're not even Muslim. They just want to tell their friends, like, look at what I eat. I could have just catered to them, but no. And so when we sold a good quality product that you could eat and it tasted so different, and it was like $8 for a pound of ground beef. And somebody says, like, well, what do we do with this? It costs a lot. My answer to them as a man who owns a meat store was eat less meat. So if you're going to eat meat, spend a little bit more on the quality. And then when we say, like, should I go to just the farmers markets? Like, yes, go to the farmers markets. And then if you have to prep your food more and eat out less, because you're lying. If you tell me you eat in New York City, and with the way post-COVID supply chains have skyrocketed across the board, and eating out on average is going to cost you per meal likely like 20, 30 bucks on something that just 3 years ago would have been half of the cost. You could definitely take that, buy the ingredients you need, wake up for Fajr, so that after you wake up for Fajr, you cook some meals for yourself. And then a farmer's market is not an improbable thing. If you buy a whole chicken, do you know how many meals you can make from a whole chicken? Broth that you can make from a whole chicken in your home by yourself? You keep the bones and you can do things with that. It's crazy like what you could do. If you're not thinking that I have to eat meat every single meal of every single day that I have, you buy like solid vegetables, fruits, other things. I like taking apples and dipping them in just pure peanut butter. It tastes amazing. I'll eat a banana and I'll just put peanut butter on it. It's great, right? And I could eat that all day, every day. Do you know what I mean? But you have to want it. And one of the things that can encourage the wanting of it is hadith that are like this. Forget about everybody else. Forget about the person who's in your face because they think Islam is only through this prism of what is hyper legalized, right? Forget those people. Your du'as are impacted by what you consume. This is what it is. How could it not? Like, your heart and its attentiveness like plays a role. So how is the heart sovereign when the stomach is what's defining decisions? Just think about it, right? Every so often something can be the case, and then at the minimum, like when it's mindless, like you think, really just think. When you eat food or drink water, how many times after how many bites are you saying Alhamdulillah? How many meals are you eating where you are beginning with like du'as, Allahumma barik lana fima razaqtana wa qina adhab an-nar, right? And even if you don't know this du'a when you begin to, when do you say Bismillah before you eat, right? How will it not then impact consequently the state of your heart when you're sitting in prayer? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So here we have this as an added variable. This hadith is about like accepted supplications. It's about accepted acts. Why is the Prophet mentioning what you eat in this? Because it contributes to it. And then you got to think about it in that way. So can I do all of it in a way where I'm consuming only at these places? Like maybe in your home you get like a bigger freezer, and once a month we all go, and some of you are like, hey man, Like, you're supposed to be in charge of this space. Take us to the farm where we could buy the stuff. But you know what? I did take a bunch of people to a farm. If you remember, some of you came with us, and we saw how it is that you can slaughter an animal, fabricate the animal. They took us to like the organic vegetable like fields that they have. We ate like purple colored carrots, right? That tasted so good, you know? You go do that once a month. You get your buddies together that you're sitting with right now. That's why I tell you, learn each other's names. So you can say, like, hey, man, I can't afford to have an entire lamb in my house, right? My freezer is a Manhattan freezer. What if 10 of us got together and we purchased a lamb together, and it lowers the cost? And then we can do it, right? Why can't you do that? Do you see what I mean? And the answer is yes, yes, you can. And sometimes it's not enough, because when the stomach is in control, the nafs is usually dictating, and it wants you to not do what's better. It wants you to do what's easier. And easier is not always better, you know? And if you don't know like whose hands have touched what you're eating, how do you know some of those hands are not like unclean hands? Like literally unclean hands. I took my kids to a pool yesterday, and I went to use the bathroom, and I was making wudu after I used the bathroom. And you should try as much as you can to be in a state of wudu, right? Like it's like a elevated state. Do you know what I mean? And just once you get into the habit of it, it's easy, right? But I'm making wudu, and people are staring at me as I'm making wudu. I'm just making wudu, you know? And it's fine. I'm comfortable with myself. But also, all these people that are watching me make wudu, there's like 10 sinks around me. None of them washed their hands after they went to the bathroom, right? But like, you have to think about this, and it's not a joke. You can't just sit here and like make noises. You have to understand why you want to eat at Muslim-owned businesses and things that emphasize like the slaughtering practices. I've owned a meat store. I know what goes into things. I've owned a restaurant, and my businesses did really well. And I looked at other places. When you have blends of things like burger patties, some of those burger patties that are served in these places, they're not required by law or standards to be 100% beef. They're putting horse meat in some of these things. They're definitely putting, like, you could find traces of pork DNA in some of these things, right? But why are you choosing to eat there? Well, it's permissible. And if all you're focused on is the permissibility that somebody else told you, then you're getting out of it what you put into it. And you could just do some cursory research, right? Like, what am I putting into my body? And I can look at studies that are done by people who aren't even of our faith. Like, what are they finding in these things? Plastic, human hair. It's haram to consume human hair, you know? There's donuts that are made with ingredients that are the byproduct of human hair. What is it? And then there's so much stuff that's in the United States that is legal, that's illegal in the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean? And that's just what it is. So when you think about people who come from immigrant culture and they're not thinking about this stuff, well, it's because where they came from, they didn't have people who were so like gross in their monetization of everything. Like, you slaughter a goat in your like your front yard in Pakistan or whatever on Eid al-Adha, and you're playing with this goat, and they drop the goat off, and you're brushing its teeth and combing its hair, and then some old man comes and slaughters it in front of you, right? Like, yeah, you know, but like, it's still eating grass in the front yard of your aunt's house, right? What you're eating is likely eating like itself. It's eating remnants of its own species. This is dishonoring the right of the animal. And why? Because your stomach just wants it? Why would you want that? Like, really think about it. Why would you want that? And then that's where what Harith is saying is important. There are power structures at play that make you think that you want the things that you want. And I could just sit here and tell you things that are facts. They're not made up, they're not meant to be sensationalized. It's just true. When you get to a place where there's now a maturation that doesn't assume immaturity, but understands spirituality is like an experiential thing. It doesn't just come to you. You have to like put in effort, right? And so you get to a place where the immediacy of the reaction of it has to be made concrete. Why am I putting this in the vessel that God entrusted to be the host of my soul in this world? And then you start to look at like the prophetic sunnah in this example. What did the prophet eat? What were foods that he enjoyed? And he ate sweet things. He ate meat. He ate vegetables. You could be a vegetarian and be Muslim. You could. Nobody can tell you you have to eat it. Just because it's permissible doesn't mean it's obligatory. But there are workarounds. And then some of it takes time. So your body, the way it detoxes on the caffeine in Ramadan, it's going to detox from this other stuff that you're accustomed to, but you'll get used to it. When I cut out processed sugars the first time in my life, right? I didn't touch this stuff for like 4 or 5 years. And it was a hard process to get it out of my system. But then I tried to eat something that I loved eating and it tasted terrible. But stuff that also I wasn't accustomed to eating tasted so much better because my entire like palate was changing as I was introducing different things into my system. You see what I mean? I fell hard during COVID, right? And in COVID, there was a lot of stress, a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff. And I was just at home. I'm eating like all kinds of stuff. And then I had to like rework what I was eating. And it was consequently impacting things like my mood and my behavior, and my physical wellness. I'm going to turn 42 this year. I'm not 22 years old anymore, right? So my 52-year-old self, if I get to that point, is going to be in a place where they're going to either thank my 42-year-old self or hate my 42-year-old self for what it is that I'm consuming. And you, at whatever age you're at right now, the older version of you is going to do the same thing to you. And that version isn't going to be tasting what you ate last Friday night. They're going to be saying, why were you so dumb that you ate that thing that you knew was gross and terrible and was just fleeting? It was complacency. And now for the latter decades of your life, you're going to live miserable with various illnesses and challenges because you didn't eat smart and build good habits. And our tradition teaches us about everything. It's not a once a week you go to this building, but it's telling you when you leave it, this is also how you be. This is what you do. Do you see what I mean? One of the other things that we want to think about here is how our religion is very encompassing of morality on numerous things. If we're getting to a place where ethics are a present variable in something like what we eat, you don't think there's ethics then in like everything? In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that Allah has prescribed ihsan on everything. So the way you treat everybody in your life, the way you treat Allah's creation, the way you treat like the trees and the security guards and the Uber drivers, and you treat people of different cultures and backgrounds, and the birds and the animals, and everything that goes into everything that's around you. In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that this thing of ihsan is on everything. And you use hadith like this as an entry point to be able to think, hey, nobody ever taught me about ethical consumption, but the Prophet did. What are other things that I might have been taught about, but not taught about through the prisms of ethics and morals? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, who taught me how to be an ethical parent? Not in a space of moral ambiguity, but with a frame of morality. How am I like ethical in my relationships to any of the people I interface with? What's like a moral treatment of myself? Do you know? Like, am I doing right by me by putting garbage in my body or not? Do you see what I mean? But if this hadith is telling us that even in something that every human being, forget about every Muslim, every human being has to eat food, right? And you have verses in the Quran that are even addressed, Ya ayyuhan nas, that, oh, humanity, not Ya ayyuhar rusul or Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, but Ya ayyuhan nas, oh, humanity, eat that which is good. Yeah. The Quran made a lot of stuff halal for you. Do you eat every single thing that's made halal for you every time you eat? No, right? You can't create like slogans and platitudes. I don't know any of the people that are involved. I'm sure they're nice people, right? But it doesn't make sense. Do you see? Like this statement, it's like a far reach that like, I'm just going to eat vegetables. Do you know? There's hadith in the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Umar says, beware of like consuming red meat. It has the addictive characteristics of khamr. Somebody could read that hadith and say, I'm just going to eat chicken. Does it mean that they've made something permissible, impermissible? No. And the concluding point to that is actually problematic because you're saying something with an authority that is not necessarily rooted in our religious tradition. There's a lot of Muslims who don't eat meat at all or eat a lot of meat. There's a lot of people who can't afford meat. Meat historically was something that might have been done at celebratory. You have an akika, like slaughter an animal. You have a walima. Akika is when a baby is born. A walima is a wedding reception. There's feasts, right? There's a feast. Let's celebrate. That's where we're going to slaughter an animal, right? Just think, I'm saying it because I love you, right? How much meat have you eaten in the last 24 hours? How many meals in the last week have you eaten that has meat present in it? Some of you have not eaten a lot. A lot of you have eaten it every single meal. Do you know? The Prophet didn't go 40 days eating meat every day, nor did he go 40 days without eating meat once, right? He ate meat, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't be a vegetarian. That's just what you're choosing for yourself. Permissibility does not equate to normativity. Just because it's allowed to be done doesn't mean it's the only way for it to be done. I can choose to eat like fish. You don't have to eat chicken. You don't have to eat beef. You don't have to eat lamb. If you're going to eat it, though, eat it mindfully. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'm just going to say this also. Be careful when you speak about religion, because you could say something and just be very wrong, right? And that poor guy, if he wants to be a vegetarian and now he feels like he's doing something haram because he's going to just eat vegetables, right? It's a problem. If you got in somebody's face and you're like, I can't believe you're eating burger, you terrible human. No, man. Like, let them be and eat what they want to eat, right? As long as it's fitting in with what Allah has allowed for us to do. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? But if somebody says being a vegetarian is haram, right? You are now speaking on God's behalf. Where can you open the Quran and it tells you the way eating pork is haram is that being a vegetarian is haram? It's a big statement to make. You're going to stand in front of the divine and have to answer about why you said this. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Okay, let's do this. We're probably not going to come back to this hadith again, but we talked about it a lot, right? Just sit and reflect on your consumption habits as best as you can. Do you know what I mean? And you want to try your best. You want to just think about it. Mindful, moral, ethical consumption, where you can manage is different from where there's not capacity. Don't go home if you live with your family and throw away all of the groceries in like your family's house. That's not what we're saying to do. But where you can make like slight changes. If you can fast, you want to bring fasting as a regular practice into your life, not just in Ramadan, but fast on Mondays and Thursdays, fast the middle days of the month, right? Regulate your consumption habits. Some of us eat because we don't know what else to do, right? That's not a good reason to eat. Eat when you are hungry. Don't eat because you are bored. Do you see what I mean? And it creates mental discipline, mental strength that exerts itself now in other things. So our teachers tell us, if you can learn how to control your stomach, you can pretty much be in control of anything else, you know? And it can be hard, like super hard. So you want to be kind to yourself, right? And have gradual expectations as you're weaning off and on to things. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question because I remember like and a lot of people were asking me, you kind of talked about the story about like how Muslim people like really describe like fasting the day before and the day after to like maybe some people different than other people fasting at the time. I'm just like thinking like with like dietary habits, kind of offers these questions to like if you don't have health concerns, are there differences between like Muslim people and other people, right? It's not like they're like, oh, we don't eat pork too, so we eat kosher food, right? We eat like halal food. Like, what is that outside of like, I guess, just like health issues, right? Like if someone's like, I can't eat red meat, like that makes sense. But like I said, also it's not like forcing people to eat and not. So like, are there distinctions for Muslims?
Are there distinctions for Muslims in what regard? Can you flesh that out? I'm not sure if I understood what you're saying.
I guess like outside of what's halal, it's not like, oh, I don't know. It's kind of like I'm still thinking it through. Like I guess just like there's rules and you can follow that, and if you don't go past those, you're fine.
Well, it's going to be individualized sometimes, if I can understand it, right? Like there might be something that you can eat that somebody next to you can't eat because it'll be harmful for them, right? Like if somebody overexerted and overindulged and it now has led them towards like different types of diabetes, for example, do you know? And eating something will cause physical harm to their body, right? Like the food might not be impermissible, it could be halal, but for that person, eating it will be detrimental to their wellness. Do you see? Does that make sense? So some of it will be individualized. And then also, as you get deeper into it, like all of us are different. So the way we respond to certain foods is going to be different, right? Some of us are allergic to certain things and not other things. Do you know what I mean? So taking that concept, you pay attention to what the food is doing to my body. So something I eat might then have a tendency to impact my mood and my behavior. Certain things that I eat might create like a sense of sluggishness within me or make me more exhausted or prone to going to sleep, right? Other things might give me energy and make me feel uplifted. We have like like I'll give you an example. In Haiti, Allah make things easy for the people of Haiti. There's a brother that drove us in an Uber the other day. His name is Omar, and he was Haitian, and he was like listening to Quran on blast in this Uber. And me and my wife started to talk to him, and I was asking him questions about Haiti, and my wife was asking him questions about Haiti. And he was saying in Haiti right now, no one's talking about it, but everybody's fighting each other. It's not that there's like one side fighting another side, but everyone's in a place where they're just like fighting multiple people simultaneously and nobody's talking about it. May Allah grant them ease. When you do humanitarian work, there has to be ihsan to what you do. So when Haiti experienced a lot of natural disasters, right? And people from all over the world were sending aid to the people of Haiti, they were taking rice that came from, I think, China or something, low priced commodity that people will eat, but it wasn't part of a Haitian diet. And after so much time of consuming something that was out of their diet, it then created now like illnesses that they didn't have prior to because they were consuming something that wasn't part of what they did. And why this came up was when I went to Myanmar to do some work with the Rohingya, Islamic Relief gave rice to the Rohingya in these camps in Bangladesh, but they purposely got them rice that was different from rice that was from Bangladesh. It was the breed of rice that they were accustomed to having in Myanmar. And I sat with a woman who ate this rice and tears came out of her eyes. And it gave her a sense of just familiarity from genocide she fled, but also that someone was thoughtful enough to think about who she was in terms of what she was accustomed to. Do you see what I mean? So if you eat something for 20, 30 years, your body physiologically is building up like certain enzymes to break it down and consume it and whatever else. That's why, like, if we brought in somebody who is a Jain or Hindu, and he said, after not eating meat for like 30, 40 years, I'm going to like eat a burger with you. And we're not forcing it on the brother. He just wants to eat it. And he'll eat it. He'll probably throw it up. Not because it tastes bad. His body doesn't produce what's necessary to break it down, right? And you want to think about that when you like consume new emotions the first time, 20, 30 years into your life, how your body, your mind, your spirit are responding to heartbreak for the first time, or betrayal for the first time, or like real love for the first time, right? You haven't consumed it before. It's going to throw you haywire, you know? But speaking to this point, like you're a product of some of these things, right? And these things can have these types of impact. And so a lot of people in Haiti were getting supported, but they weren't being supported with the particularity of who they were. And the food in the interim fed their stomachs, but in the long term created a lot of illnesses that could have otherwise been avoided had somebody thought about it in that way. Does that make sense? So it's not just like, hey, this works. And so you reflect, right? Like, hey, how did I sleep when I ate at 6 p.m. instead of at 10 p.m.? Do you know? What difference did it make? Why am I able to stay up later to pray at night in Ramadan when I'm eating less? How does it impact the quality of my sleep? Do you see what I mean? So it's not just like, let me read the ingredients on the back of something, but how am I thinking about this as a holistic experience? This is what Shaitan doesn't want you to do. He wants you to not just take steps backward, but when you have potential of this much gain and he gets you to gain just this much, he's going to settle to have this type of gain. So what's experiential, you just start to reflect upon it, right? I can stay up for the last 10 nights of Ramadan on 3 hours of sleep. Well, it's because you're not emptying your stomach, you're feeding your heart in Ramadan. And you're in a place where the absence of the focus on the feeding of the stomach allows for other parts to be nourished that then interject barakah into your sleep that otherwise can't be there. Because if you go to sleep at 1 in the morning and you eat at midnight, then your body is exerting energy just digesting food that you should have stopped eating 3 or 4 hours before. Do you get what I mean? And then you're going to be super sluggish when you wake up for Fajr because you ate at the wrong time of the day. But it's individualized. Like you have to pay attention to it for yourself. Does that somewhat like kind of respond to a little bit what you're saying? Right? So just it's a work in progress, right? And I'm going to say this to you because I'm a little older than a lot of you in the room. Not everybody. Some of you are older than me, but not all of you, right? You just have to be ready that it's going to also change in different phases of your life, right? So it'd be amazing if you could eat the same way and sleep as much as when you're 20, when you're 30, or you're 40. You will not be able to. It's going to ruin like a lot of your life if when you're 42 years old, you're eating the same way, but you're open. You embrace like change and fluctuation, but you're still going to have impact from what you do at a certain age to when you're a little bit later on in your life. So just reflect on it, like between now and inshallah, the next time we meet, we'll start the next hadith. I'm not going to be here next Monday. I don't know if we're going to have somebody who's here doing something. at this time, but we'll put it out in the email list. So just so people look out for that. And people have ideas on things that we could also do in this time slot. So there's not like a break, right? Like a good number of people are showing up. Likely I'll ask somebody to come to kind of keep it going. But I won't be here on Monday next week, but still anticipate, I think, coming to something. And we'll ask somebody to come. And if there's ideas people have on what that could be, let us know as well. So just before we break for Maghrib, if people want to take like 2 quick minutes, turn to the persons next to you. What are you taking away from today's conversation? And then we'll wrap up for today, inshallah. But go ahead. Okay, what are some of the things? Maybe 1 or 2 people. And then there was one thought that popped in my head that I forgot that I wanted to share. But anybody, a couple of people, what are some of the things we're taking away from today? Yeah. No. It's bad. Do you hear how much I talk, man? You can't ask questions. Just save it for later. Some thoughts. What are some thoughts you're taking away? Anybody? Yeah. Yeah, look here. We have elements of continuity, change, right? You were gonna say something? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the lines that really stood out to me was paraphrasing what you said, but
written down that like our bodies are the vessels that Allah chose to hold our souls, I feel like makes it so much more real than this is just like, okay, me just eating leftovers and whatever. It's like literally a vessel for my soul, and I think that's what it is.
So one of the things that I want us to also think about in reflection, when you walk around your neighborhood, like notice the type of stores that are around you, right? And then when you walk in other neighborhoods, think about the stores that are not there and how food in and of itself and consumption is very racialized as well, right? And then where we as a community play a role in being able to help. When you're thinking about sadaqah, for example, we raised in a night, people asked us to help collect, I think, for 30,000 meals for migrants, suhoor and iftar or something. I don't remember the numbers, but mashallah, I'm so proud of this community. We announced it at Tarawih one night, and the next morning we had raised $300,000, you know? When do you think those migrants are eating oranges or apples these days? And if they walked into a corner bodega, how much would it cost? My friend Rami Nashashibi, who works on the south side of Chicago, he started an organization in the 90s called Iman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, that now has an entire campus, wellness center, reentry programs. Rami's one of the most beautiful people, mashallah, in the world. Very genuine, sincere. He's Palestinian, ethnically, works in neighborhoods that many Muslims have forgotten. I went to visit them once, and they have like their own like farmers market, right? And why I'm saying this is when we get our own spaces, inshallah, like you want to think creatively about these things. On the south side of Chicago, one of the campaigns they had was where there's food deserts purposefully. Think about how anti-blackness works in every facet, that you can create numerous liquor stores, fast food chains, but no grocery stores unless you got to take 3 buses 5 hours away, 4 hours, 3 hours away, you know? And you walk into one of these bodegas and an orange costs you $5. And you work a minimum wage job that pays you in New York $15 an hour, right? A subway ride is $2.90. And then you got to decide between the box of like unhealthy bars that cost $2 or the orange that costs $5. So I was with Rami in Chicago. One of the campaigns they did through Iman was they bought a ton of produce, went to the local bodegas, gave it to them for free, and said, this Ramadan, instead of selling this orange for $5, sell 3 for $1 or something. Do you know? That's how you think creatively, right? Like when somebody tells you the hadith about the prostitute who's forgiven and given Jannah for giving an animal that's thirsty water to drink, it's about Allah's rahmah and mercy and so much, but it also teaches you that there's benefit in feeding animals that are hungry and thirsty. You could go to Turkey, they have endowments that are just giant bird houses. All that they do is feed birds, right? You gotta be creative and bold. You think from your study hands, and you don't see things. So you don't see how structurally and systematically you can also oppress people by controlling what kind of food they have access to. And then when you throw it away in mass, as opposed to doing things like composting, when you put more on the plate that you can take it, put it in like a community fridge, the people who don't have anything to eat can open up and take some. So you want to like be genuine, do acts in secrecy that nobody sees, go buy a box of oranges and give them to like some people who likely somebody's gonna like, what are the leftovers from your food that you share with somebody who's homeless typically? You want to eat the rest of my cart that I didn't eat, like chicken and rice. You want to eat like some of this pizza I didn't eat. You're like, hey man, here's some coconut water for you to drink. You know, here's some like, did you like the watermelon we just had? Right? Like this fruit that we have, it's purposeful to keep it out of people's diets so that it also then impacts consequently health, which then impacts like other facets of life, right? If you've never had to think that way, you have to recognize like the privilege that you have. And so in the reflection, walk around your neighborhood, What kind of stuff is accessible to you? And then take a walk in a neighborhood that you normally wouldn't walk down. Why aren't there any of these things in this neighborhood? Do you understand? Right? And our tradition teaches us to love for people what we love for ourselves, which is another reason why you have to love what you eat, so that you start to be worried about what it is that people who don't have anything, we don't want to just give them stuff we wouldn't touch ourselves, but give the best of what we have. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a pause here. People can put their chairs against the wall. We're going to have the rest of the halakas that we have this week taking place. And